G'day guys and gal. Out of all the Primarchs, Magnus should have been the most powerful. His psychic abilities were second only to the Emperor himself, and it wasn't by much. Magnus was so powerful that the Emperor literally centered his entire Webway plan around him, planning on using him as a battery as he was the only other being in the galaxy that could permanently withstand the Golden Throne as well as the Emperor could. But time and time again in the lore, we see Magnus get clapped hard. Leman, Vulcan, and multiple Space Wolves have spanked the Crimson King so hard that his face looks white in comparison to his ass. Why is that? Well, the leading theory is that because Magnus was broken up to a number of shards, some that he was unable to recover, he has been permanently weakened, no longer a full Primarch, more like 80% of a Primarch, thus never able to achieve his true power, hence why his spank rate is so high. But that does ask the question, what did each of Magnus's shards represent? How did he recover the ones that he did? How did he lose those shards in the first place? And what happened to the shards that he was never able to recover? This lore is niche as shit, but goddamn it's interesting. Before we get started, you need to appreciate how much grooming and hygiene can do for your attractiveness. For example, manscaping is high up on the list for what women want, so I've partnered up with Manscaped today to bring you a one-stop shop for all your masculine, shaving, nice smelling and washing needs. The range is huge, shampoos, deodorants, even underwear, but the two hero products of Manscaped, which are unsurprisingly the two products I use the most, are the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra and the Handyman, two similar shavers with very different purposes. The Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra lives on my balls. I use it to keep everything below my collarbone clean and tidy. It's packed with features, long battery life, waterproof, but most importantly, skin-safe technology, which means you will very rarely, if ever, nip or cut your family jewels using this bad boy. It just glides through the jungle. The Handyman is my neckbeard destroyer. It gives me a skin-close shave of the neck without any cuts, rashes, bumps, nor do you need shaving cream or aftershave. It can also be used on your body or even your downstairs, but I like to try to keep those two areas separate. If there were only two things I could ever buy from Manscaped again, it would 100% be these two. The great news is that by using my link below, you'll get 20% off the entire Manscaped range, not just the Lawnmower or the Handyman, as well as free international shipping. Cheers to Manscaped for sponsoring this video. Today we'll go over each of the shards of Magnus, detailing what they did, how powerful they were, and what became of them. Let's get into it. To give some context on what the fuck I'm talking about, Magnus was uber powerful, which was actually his greatest weakness. He was so overconfident and sure of himself that he often went too far, even further than his own capabilities, which resulted in some pretty bad times. Now, many people think that Magnus was shattered as a result of Leman kicking his ass and then Magnus taking a rush deal with Titsnitch that teleported him to safety. And whilst most of his shards did break off in that way, he had actually already shed a few before then, which helps explain some of his retarded decision making. He quite literally wasn't himself. See, Magnus was turbo loyal. No one thought he would ever betray the Emperor, not even Horus, with the original intention of manipulating Leman into attacking Magnus being to try wipe out the Space Wolves and Thousand Suns in one go, not push the Thousand Suns to join chaos. Even when Magnus got clapped by Leman and fled with his few remaining warriors, he still wasn't actually convinced of which side he should take, and even actively helped the loyalists on numerous occasions. To make his loyalty even more impressive, this was when he had been shattered and his sanity wasn't doing so hot. He had also lost the shard of himself that contained his nobility, the thing that was keeping him loyal. It is this sharding that I believe to be the main reason why Magnus went traitor. Alright, so now to get into the shard business. The first shard Magnus lost, which set the stage for the loss of the rest, was his noble shard, the Shard of Terror. This was considered to be one of his most powerful shards, second only to the Crimson King shard that I'll get into soon. When Magnus used the power of Titsnitch to breach the Emperor's Webway project wards in an ill-fated attempt to warn his father of Horus's betrayal, the effort and instability of doing so tore off his nobility. This is also probably because the act of using such dark warp sorcery, something the Emperor had forbidden Magnus from doing, was such an ignoble act that it was almost like he was no longer worthy of his nobility. Magnus didn't really notice the loss of this shard initially, but upon returning from his astral projection, he had changed. Magnus was no longer this confident, decisive leader full of compassion. He was panicking, at one minute angry, then the next suicidal. If he had maintained his noble shard, then it's likely he would have had the common sense to meet Leman's fleet in the void and surrendered in person, not just condemn his legion to death by blinding their psychic senses and letting the wolves bomb the shit out of them. This shard was left on Terra and wandered around in the depths of the dungeons of the Imperial Palace where it was discovered by Malkador. When Jagadai arrived on Terra with Reviel Arvida, who was a powerful Thousand Sun sorcerer who hadn't been on Prospero at the time of its destruction, Malkador hatched a plan. Arvida was about to succumb to the flesh change and become a Chaos Spawn, so Malkador merged Arvida with the noble shard of Magnus in order to try create a new Magnus. He hoped that this new Magnus would be powerful enough to take the Emperor's place place on the Golden Throne. Spoilers, it wasn't. However, it did create a powerful noble psychic space marine warrior who would go on to become the first Supreme Grandmaster of the Grey Knights, so that's pretty neat. There is actually a theory that whenever a Supreme Grandmaster dies, the noble shard of Magnus will attach itself to the new Supreme Grandmaster, which would A, allow the noble Magnus to live on in some way, and B, explain why Kaldor Drago is so fucking overpowered, because he would be a Demi-Primarch. However, as that isn't confirmed yet, we currently don't know the status of the Noble Shard. What we do know is that Magnus was extremely keen to try and recover this Noble Shard, even leading a risky attack on the palace to try get it. When he was informed that it was out of his reach permanently, he raged super fucking hard and more or less sealed his own fate as a traitor. Magnus forever lost his nobility. The next shard I want to speak about, which was the main shard that had been absorbing the other shards, is the Shard of Power, the Crimson King. This is the shard that teleported to the planet of sorcerers to escape Prospero. It was bitter, power-hungry, and pissed off. It also suffered from hectic dementia and was dying due to the loss of so many shards. Hence it spent most of its time meditating, watching the heresy play out, or just being a vegetable. Ahriman and the Thousand Sons had to actively seek out and return numerous shards to Magnus in order to eventually stabilize him and return their Primarch back to active form. Without the Noble Shard to balance him out, the Crimson King had become a dark version of himself. He was so bitter that even when it was pointed out to him that Horus had been the architect of his misfortune and that he had masterminded the fall of Prospero, Magnus just didn't really care, as it was easier for his ego to lash out at his father rather than take responsibility and do the right thing. From here, the rest of the shards were more minor aspects, however they were still quite important. It even seems as if Malcador and Ahriman entered into a bit of a race to try recover some of Magnus's shards. Ahriman to restore his father, Malcador to potentially empower the Noble Shard. One of the more minor shards of Magnus was left on Prospero and was discovered by Jaghatai Khan. This was called the Shard of Prospero. The two spoke, with this shard being very melancholic and pretty matter-of-fact about the situation. It told Jaghatai of the wolves' attack, but it didn't seem to try sway Jaghatai one way or the other. It just told him to pick a side and gave him information so that he could make his own decision. Jaghatai destroyed the shard as an act of mercy, but it's not clear if it actually represented anything or if it was just the sliver left behind. A more spicy shard was the Shard of Agoru, which was transported to the planet of Agoru, which was a planet that Magnus had made compliant via fighting some Eldar Titans and closing a warp-corrupted Eldar Webway gate. This shard represented Magnus's warrior spirit, and it created an arena and challenged people to fights, which is pretty hilarious. The agents of Malcador tried to fight it, but got clapped, so they sealed him in the body of a Psyker in order to try take him back to Terra. However, Ahriman was able to take the Psyker off Malcador's boys and extracted the Magnus Shard from it, eventually merging the shard back into the Crimson King. The Shard of Cadmus was an extremely powerful shard, representing Magnus's quest for knowledge. Due to its nature, the shard was extremely elusive and hard to track down. It actually once traveled into the Ruinstorm in order to help some salamanders get Vulcan's corpse to Nocturne in order to resurrect his brother. See, Magnus and Vulcan were close, but this experience was wild. This Magnus Shard manifested on the Salamander ship and basically interrogated and fucked with the Salamander captain, even getting close to killing him, before deciding to save them all instead. This shard was so powerful, everyone thought it was Magnus himself who had come, not just a shard. Ahriman would eventually track the shard down by traveling back in time and locating it on Terra, eventually remerging it back into his Primarch. Then there was the Shard of Callista Eris, which was named after a highly regarded remembrancer who worked with the Thousand Sons. She was a Psyker who could see the future, but ended up dying a horrific death due to her powers. As the Thousand Sons let her die in order to try see a glimpse of the future, her ashes were put into an urn and carried by her friends. However, the urn also became a home to a minor Shard of Magnus, which I believed was absorbed by the Shard of Agoru, which means it was inevitably absorbed by the Crimson King. Now inherently, the Shards of Magnus wanted to reform for the most part. They were slowly dying by themselves. So one of the shards, the Athenaeum of Callimachus, actually planted the seeds of the second rubric of Ahriman in Ahriman's mind. This shard represented Magnus's secrets, manipulations, and schemes, so it makes sense. Ahriman attempted a second rubric in order to try restore his Dusty Legion back to flesh and blood, free from the flesh change. It actually may have worked as well, but the ritual was hijacked by a number of shards of Magnus who used the ritual's energies to remerge with the Crimson King and restore Magnus's power and sanity, turning him from this semi-demented, moody-ass bitch back to his pre-Horus Heresy strength and sanity, although with a few personality issues as he was still without a few of his shards, notably his noble one. During this rubric, another shard of Magnus was also turned to the Crimson King, the shard that represented Magnus's anger. It manifested as an angry-ass demon which possessed the Thousand Sun Sorcerer. Magnus tore the shard from the Sorcerer and absorbed it during the second rubric. There was also the Shard of Ahriman, which I don't know much about. It lived inside of Ahriman, subtly hiding in his mind without Ahriman even knowing. Maybe this is the source of Ahriman's extreme power, or the fact that he is able to defy fate and even impress Titsnitch, or the fact that he has never stopped searching for a solution to all problems, despite how much shit it is putting him through. Either way, I'm not sure if it's still in him or it has been removed. The Shard of Nikeah is in a similar spot. I'm not really sure what happened to that, but since it only really represented Magnus being a Sado because of the Edict of Nikeah, I don't think it was too important. As a bit of a sad piece of lore, Ahriman and his brothers were all pretty upset by the changes that happened within Magnus. He went from a super caring father that would give up his soul to protect his sons to a cold, aloof asshole who actively tried to block Ahriman from stopping the flesh change. Ahriman convinced himself that it wasn't Magnus's fault and that he had simply lost the shard of himself that loved his sons. However, more than likely, this shard doesn't exist, and Magnus just simply doesn't give a fuck about his legion anymore. With most of his shards returned, the current Magnus is incredibly powerful and no longer has dementia or bipolar, meaning the shit he does actually makes sense. However, with some shards lost to him forever, as well as him becoming a demon prince, he will never achieve his full potential. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then Patreon is the place to be, where we've just uploaded even more raw, unedited photos of the 2024 nude cosplay calendar. Hit the subscribe button, hit the real subscribe button for more shardy content. Join the Discord for more memes, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.